Tahoe's water level has dropped to a 4-year low. It was hovering around the natural rim, but this week it fell just below it.
On March 3, 1991, a multi-million-dollar underwater robot was sent down nearly 500 feet beneath the surface of Lake Tahoe. The mission seemed simple: locate the legendary SS Tahoe, a luxury steamship that had been missing for more than 50 years. And they found it. But moments later, as the camera drifted beyond the wreck, it revealed something nobody expected. The crew fell silent. Seconds later, an urgent order came through: pull the ROV back immediately. And then the video feed went black. Officially, only the ship had been discovered. But according to one man who claimed he was there, the camera recorded something far more disturbing before the recording ended. So what exactly did the crew see on those final frames? And what made them cut the recording immediately? Let's dive in. Beneath perfect water. Every year, more than 15 million people come to Lake Tahoe. That's more visitors than almost all of America's most famous national parks. And the biggest reason they come is the crystal clear water that makes the lake look almost unreal. More like the Caribbean than the Sierra Nevada. Families swim here, kayakers glide across it, but almost nobody stops to think about what's hiding underneath. Because this isn't just another lake. At more than 1,645 feet deep, it's one of the deepest lakes in North America. But the depth itself isn't what makes Tahoe different. It's what happens after something sinks below about 600 feet. Down there, the water locks at 39 degrees Fahrenheit, just under 4 degrees Celsius. And it stays that way all year long. It doesn't matter if it's the middle of winter or the hottest day of summer. The deep lake barely changes, turning it into a giant natural freezer that has existed for thousands of years. And then there's something even stranger. Lake Tahoe is almost a closed system. More than 60 streams carry water into it, but only one small river, the Truckee River, carries water out. Scientists estimate that a drop of water entering the deepest part of the lake can remain trapped there for around 650 years before finally leaving. Now imagine what that means for anything heavier than water. Once it sinks, it rarely goes anywhere. But wait, because even that isn't the biggest surprise. At the lake floor, the pressure climbs to more than 715 pounds per square inch. That's nearly 50 times greater than the air pressure you're feeling right now. That enormous force squeezes trapped air from wood, boats, and other objects, helping keep them firmly on the bottom instead of floating back up. And then something else happens. Normally, warm water is full of bacteria. Those bacteria feed on dead plants, wood, and animal tissue. As they work, they produce gases that make objects float and speed up decay. Lake Tahoe almost shuts that process down. The water is close to freezing, contains very little oxygen, and has almost no nutrients for bacteria to survive. And without those tiny organisms, the natural process of decomposition slows to a crawl. But the story doesn't end there, because sometimes something even more disturbing happens. Instead of breaking apart, human and animal tissue can go through a rare process called adipocere, better known as grave wax. The body's natural fats slowly change into a hard, wax-like layer that protects what's underneath. Clothes, facial features, even muscles can survive far longer than most people would ever imagine. That's why Lake Tahoe has earned a reputation unlike almost any other lake in America. It doesn't simply bury the past, it preserves it. The story of the SS Tahoe. The story begins in 1896, when one of the most impressive ships Lake Tahoe had ever seen entered the water. Built by Union Iron Works in San Francisco, the SS Tahoe stretched 169 feet from bow to stern. Powered by twin wood-fired steam engines producing 1,200 horsepower, it could reach nearly 21 miles per hour, making it the fastest and largest ship on the lake at the time. But speed wasn't the only thing that made the SS Tahoe famous. Back then, there were no paved highways around the lake. Traveling by land meant long, rough journeys over mountain trails that could take days. So for thousands of people, the SS Tahoe wasn't just another steamship, it was the lake's lifeline. Day after day, it carried up to 200 passengers, along with mail, supplies, and freight. Connecting remote logging camps, small lakeside communities, and luxury resorts. And boarding the ship wasn't treated like an ordinary trip. People dressed in suits and elegant gowns because crossing Lake Tahoe on the SS Tahoe was an experience in itself. But then, everything changed. As America entered the age of the automobile, better roads were built and cars became more common. Fewer and fewer people needed a steamship. By the late 1930s, the SS Tahoe had become too expensive to keep running. She sat tied to the dock in Glenbrook, slowly rusting away while maintenance costs continued to climb. So on August 29, 1940, owner William Bliss made a surprising decision. Instead of scrapping the ship, he wanted to give the Queen of the Lake a proper farewell. The plan was to tow her into Glenbrook Bay and sink her in about 100 feet of water, shallow enough that part of the ship would remain visible as a permanent monument for tourists riding glass-bottom boats. But almost nothing went according to plan. After workers opened the ship's sea valves and blasted holes in the hull with dynamite, water quickly rushed inside. As the SS Tahoe began to sink, its heavy stern slipped over the edge of a steep underwater granite cliff. The ship slid backward into a deep, unexplored part of the lake that nobody had properly mapped. Hunting a ghost. The search finally began on March 3, 1991. That date wasn't chosen by chance. Early March gives Lake Tahoe its clearest water of the entire year. During winter, the lake naturally mixes from top to bottom, clearing away much of the sediment and algae that make underwater searches harder in other seasons. If you wanted the best chance of finding a ship lost for half a century, this was the moment. But clear water didn't mean easy conditions. Above the lake, temperatures dropped well below freezing. Strong winds swept across Glenbrook Bay, covering the deck with ice. Wet cables froze in the crew's hands. Metal equipment became almost impossible to handle. Every hour outside felt longer than the last. Leading the expedition was Chris Nicholson, founder of Deep Sea Systems International. He wasn't a treasure hunter chasing legends. He was an engineer who built remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, for some of the toughest underwater jobs, including work for the U.S. Navy and deep-sea recovery missions. If anyone had the tools to find the SS Tahoe, it was him. Human divers never stood a chance. The target was hundreds of feet below the surface, far beyond the limits of normal scuba diving. So the team relied on side-scan sonar, which sent sound waves across the lake floor to create a map of anything unusual below. Whenever the sonar detected a suspicious shape, they lowered the ROV, a camera-equipped underwater robot connected to the surface by a long fiber optic cable. Hour after hour, the screens showed almost nothing. Flat lakebed, rock walls, false signals that disappeared the moment they were checked. Every mistake cost precious time, drained batteries, and pushed the crew closer to calling it a day. Then the sonar picked up something real. The ROV descended into the darkness and revealed an upright commercial towboat resting on the lake floor. Nobody on the team had expected it. Even more surprising, there were no known records of it ever sinking. That discovery changed everything. If an entire towboat could disappear into Lake Tahoe without anyone remembering it, what else had the lake erased from history? Only a few hours later, the sonar lit up again. This time, the shadow was far larger. A huge shape stretching nearly 170 feet across the darkness, resting beside a steep underwater drop-off. The numbers matched. The outline matched. The location matched. After 50 years of searching, there was no other explanation. The Queen of the Lake had finally been found. But the discovery itself was only the beginning. Because when the first images from below finally reached the surface, the team discovered something far stranger than a forgotten ship sitting in the darkness. 50 years later, when the ROV finally reached the SS Tahoe, the team expected to find a wreck that had spent half a century underwater. But what they found looked almost impossible. The ship was not lying broken apart on the lake floor. It was still sitting upright, resting along a steep underwater slope, with its bow rising at around 365 feet deep, and its stern dropping down toward 475 feet below the surface. The Queen of the Lake had not disappeared. She had been waiting. As the ROV lights moved across the hull, details from another era began appearing out of the darkness. The original white paint on the upper cabins was still visible, giving the ship an eerie appearance, almost as if passengers had stepped away only moments earlier. Even more surprising were the smaller details. The brass fittings, window frames, and metal fixtures that once gave the SS Tahoe its luxury had not turned into corroded pieces of underwater debris. They still reflected the ROV's lights, protected by Tahoe's cold, clean, freshwater environment. For the crew watching from the surface, this was not just a shipwreck. It was a frozen piece of history. A vessel built in 1896, preserved in a condition nobody expected to see more than 50 years after it disappeared beneath the lake. But the SS Tahoe was not just a preserved time capsule, it had become a hidden hazard. Over the decades, fishermen searching the deep waters around Glenbrook Bay had unknowingly snagged their lines on the ship's upright wooden masts. Thousands of feet of nearly invisible monofilament fishing line wrapped around the ship, creating a tangled underwater web. For the ROV operators, this was not just an inconvenience. A single line caught in a propeller or thruster could trap the vehicle hundreds of feet below the surface, cutting the team off from the machine they depended on. Still, the team continued documenting the ship. They recorded the hull, the decks, and the remains of the vessel that once carried passengers across Lake Tahoe. Everything about the discovery seemed extraordinary. But as the ROV pulled away for one final look, the camera drifted beyond the familiar shape of the ship, and the lights reached a part of the lake floor that nobody had expected to see: the wrong discovery. As the camera pulled away from the stern, its lights swept across the empty lake floor beside the wreck. At first, nothing looked unusual, just dark sediment, scattered debris, and the same cold, lifeless landscape that surrounded the ship. Then a pale shape appeared. It was sitting about 40 feet away from the SS Tahoe, partly covered by the fine mud at the bottom of the lake. The first reaction was simple. It had to be debris. Maybe a piece of the ship's structure, a broken fixture, something blown away when the vessel was sunk in 1940. That explanation made sense, until the camera moved closer. The object did not look like random wreckage. It had a strange smoothness to it, a shape that seemed too organized, too symmetrical, too deliberate. Nature usually leaves chaos behind. Broken rocks, scattered pieces, uneven edges. This was different. Then the ROV shifted slightly to the side, and another shape appeared. Then another. 3 pale objects were now visible on the lake floor, close together in a way that made them impossible to ignore. They were not scattered like pieces thrown from a damaged ship. They appeared grouped, almost arranged. Inside the control room, the excitement of finding the SS Tahoe disappeared. The longer they looked at these shapes, the less they looked like debris. Then someone finally suggested the possibility nobody wanted to say. They might not be looking at pieces of a ship. They might be looking at something that had once belonged to a person. And that possibility changed everything. Because if the lake had preserved the SS Tahoe this well after 50 years, what else could it have preserved in the same freezing, dark environment? Before the team could get a clearer look, the ROV's own thrusters disturbed the untouched sediment around it. A cloud of fine particles exploded upward, covering the camera view in seconds. The image disappeared. The crew was left staring at a wall of gray, unable to see what was still sitting below them. And then came the command that ended the moment. Pull it back. Bring it up right now. It was not the kind of order anyone expected after finding the most important wreck in Lake Tahoe. But something had happened in those final seconds. Something that turned a historic discovery into a sudden emergency. And strangely, the greatest mystery wasn't what they found beside the wreck. It was everything that happened on the way back. When the return became a nightmare. As the ROV began its emergency retreat, the control monitors began to show signs of trouble. The video feed, which had been stable moments earlier, began breaking apart with lines of white static cutting through the image. The thick cloud of silt already made it almost impossible to see clearly, but now the cameras themselves were beginning to fail. Then, another problem appeared. The ROV's power readings suddenly dropped, and the system that had been supplying around 440 volts fell below 180. As the voltage collapsed, the onboard cameras and electronics began malfunctioning. The picture broke into heavy pixelation, the telemetry became unreliable, and the screen dissolved into little more than gray static and scattered shadows. At the same time, the pilot was trying to pull the vehicle back through hundreds of feet of freezing water. With almost no clear picture left, the ROV tilted sharply as its thrusters fought to climb out of the deep trench. Every second increased the risk of the vehicle snagging on the wreck or disappearing into the darkness itself. For several seconds, nobody seemed to know what to do. The only sounds were the equipment running in the background and the crew's breathing as they watched the damaged feed. The lasting mystery, when the expedition finally returned to shore, the celebration everyone expected never came. According to a witness who claimed to have been on the boat, the crew reached the dock hours earlier than planned. Instead of talking about one of the greatest underwater discoveries in Lake Tahoe's history, they avoided questions, packed up their equipment, and left. Officially, only one thing was announced. The SS Tahoe had been found. Everything else became rumor. And that's what makes this story so difficult to forget. But one discovery proved something far more unsettling. In 2011, an ROV searching near Rubicon Point located the body of scuba diver Donald Christopher Windecker. He had disappeared 17 years earlier in 1994. When recovery teams brought him back to the surface, investigators found that Lake Tahoe had preserved his body with remarkable detail after nearly 2 decades underwater. His diving suit was still intact, and much of his body had been preserved by the lake's freezing, low oxygen depths. That discovery didn't prove the rumors, but it proved something almost as disturbing. Lake Tahoe really can keep what disappears beneath its surface. Maybe the crew of the 1991 expedition saw exactly what the rumors claim. Or maybe the greatest mystery isn't what they found, it's what Lake Tahoe is still hiding. So, here we are. Beneath one of America's most beautiful lakes lies a world that has preserved history, inspired legends, and left behind questions that nobody has been able to answer. Do you think the crew of the 1991 expedition witnessed something extraordinary that day? Or has the story grown into something bigger than the truth? And what do you think is still waiting at the bottom of Lake Tahoe? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want more incredible mysteries, discoveries, and true stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.